Pilot prevents black man from boarding flight, regrets it after learning his identity. James Wilson felt his blood boil as the pilot, with an impassive expression, repeated for the third time that there were irregularities in the documentation. Around them, other passengers boarded without any issues at the private airport in Teterboro. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson, but I can't allow you to board at this time," said pilot Michael Taylor, handing back the documents. "Company orders." James took a deep breath, adjusting his burgundy silk tie. In his 20 years as a businessman, he had faced similar situations, but this one was particularly frustrating. The meeting in Atlanta could save the textile factory, employing over 200 families in rural Georgia. "Can I speak to your supervisor?" James asked, keeping his voice steady. "Unfortunately, he's unavailable right now," Michael replied, avoiding eye contact. "You can reschedule your flight for tomorrow after sorting out your paperwork." James watched as another executive, fair-skinned, was greeted with smiles by the same pilot minutes later. The message was as clear as the October sky. As he walked back to the terminal, his phone buzzed. It was Jennifer, his assistant. "James, the investors will only wait until 5. If you don't make it—" "I know, Jen, get the car ready, we'll try to drive," he replied, knowing it was impossible to cover over 1,600 miles in just a few hours. What James didn't know was that this incident would completely alter the course of several lives, including that of the pilot who had just denied him boarding. In their small home in Queens, on the north side of New York City, Michael Taylor collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. It had been a rough day. The orders from Mr. Thompson, owner of Sky America, were clear. Cut costs at all costs, even if it meant finding issues with passengers who might incur extra expenses. "How was your day, honey?" asked Sarah, his wife, a nurse at Children's Hope Hospital, as she served a plate of rice, beans, and steak. "Complicated," Michael replied, avoiding details. He didn't like sharing the situations that made him feel less than honorable. The next morning, Sarah was having coffee when she saw the headline in the local newspaper. A colleague had left in the break room. "Businessman James Wilson denied boarding on private jet without clear justification." The face in the photo made her heart race. "It can't be," she murmured, recognizing the man instantly. Not by his famous business name, which she didn't know, but from seeing him countless times at the hospital, always discreet, always kind. To Sarah, he was simply Mr. W., the anonymous benefactor, who had funded treatments for underprivileged children for 5 years, including the pediatric oncology wing where she worked. The man who never allowed his name to be publicized, who appeared unannounced and left quietly after speaking with the children, the same man her husband had prevented from boarding. When Michael came home that night, he found Sarah unusually serious. "Did you stop James Wilson from boarding yesterday?" she asked, showing him the paper. Michael's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected the incident to make the news. "It was a documentation issue, Sarah. Company orders," he replied defensively. "Michael, that man is the hospital's anonymous donor, the one who pays for cancer treatments for the kids, who donated the pediatric ICU equipment." Sarah paused, watching her husband's expression change. "The man who paid for Madison's treatment, remember? Madison was the 6-year-old, daughter of Marcus, Michael's childhood best friend. The girl had survived an aggressive leukemia thanks to an experimental treatment her family could never afford." "Are you sure?" asked Michael, feeling the weight of his actions multiply exponentially. "Absolutely. He never wanted recognition, but everyone at the hospital knows who Mr. W. is," said Sarah, her voice tinged with disappointment and sadness. The weight in Michael's chest grew heavier when Sarah added, "And there's more. I heard rumors at the hospital that he's negotiating to buy Sky America." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. Mr. Thompson's words echoed in his mind. "Difficult passengers create costs. Use your creativity to keep them grounded, if necessary." Now he understood why his boss had specifically insisted he cause trouble for James Wilson. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. After a sleepless night, Michael made a decision. He needed to find James Wilson and apologize, not just for the incident, but for being an instrument of a prejudice he swore he didn't carry. Finding the businessman's whereabouts wasn't hard. The papers reported that after missing the meeting in Atlanta, James Wilson was staying at the Plaza Hotel in New York City for a series of business meetings. Wearing his best suit, the only one he owned besides his uniform, Michael drove to the five-star hotel in the heart of Fifth Avenue. His Civic 2010 looked out of place among the Cadillacs and Lexuses parked at the entrance. "I'd like to speak with Mr. James Wilson," he said to the receptionist, who looked him up and down. "Mr. Wilson isn't receiving visitors," she replied curtly. "Especially—" She hesitated, but her gaze finished the sentence. "Especially someone like you." Michael felt his face burn. It was ironic to be on the receiving end of the same prejudice he'd applied the day before. "Please, it's important. I'm pilot Michael Taylor from Sky America," he insisted. Mentioning the airline's name seemed to spark something in the receptionist, who slightly furrowed her brow. "Oh," she said in a tone Michael couldn't decipher. "Wait a moment." As she made a discreet call, Michael noticed a young employee watching him with interest. When the receptionist stepped away briefly, the young woman approached. "Are you the pilot who kept Mr. Wilson from boarding yesterday?" she asked quietly. Michael nodded, ashamed. "He's in the hotel restaurant now, last table on the right by the window," she said quickly. "And just so you know, he's a good man. He paid for my brother's treatment at Children's Hope Hospital." Before Michael could thank her, the receptionist returned. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Wilson won't be able to see you," she informed him with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Would you like to leave a message?" "That won't be necessary, thank you," Michael replied, discreetly making his way to the hotel restaurant. The restaurant was elegant, with white tablecloths and subtle floral arrangements on each table. Michael felt out of place in his navy blue suit, already worn at the elbows. He spotted James Wilson, exactly where the young receptionist had indicated, alone, reviewing documents while drinking coffee. He approached slowly, his heart racing. When he was just a few steps away, James looked up from his papers. Recognition was instant. James Wilson showed no surprise, only a studied calm that betrayed years of handling confrontations. "Mr. Taylor," he said, startling Michael by remembering his name. "I didn't expect to see you here. Mr. Wilson, Michael began, but was interrupted by an older man who quickly approached the table. "James, how good to run into you," the man said, completely ignoring Michael's presence. "We need to sign the preliminary documents for the Sky America acquisition now. Richard Thompson is pressing for an answer." The man glanced sideways at Michael, as if only just noticing him. "Is this one of the company's employees?" he asked disdainfully. James looked directly at Michael, his face unreadable. "Yes, Robert. This is Mr. Taylor, a pilot at Sky America," he replied without looking away. "And he was just leaving. We can talk another time, Mr. Taylor." Michael took the hint. He nodded respectfully and walked away, feeling even worse than when he'd arrived. Now he knew for sure James Wilson was about to become his new boss, and he'd made the worst possible first impression. On his way home, Michael got a text message from an unknown number. "Emergency meeting with all Sky America pilots tomorrow at 9 a.m. Attendance mandatory. New management." He told Sarah about his failed encounter at the hotel and the meeting scheduled for the next day. "He's going to fire me, and he'd be right to," Michael concluded, disheartened. Sarah hugged him tightly. "Maybe this is a chance to fix a mistake, not be punished for it," she said, ever the optimist. "Mr. Wilson doesn't seem like the kind of man who acts out of spite." "How can you be so sure?" Sarah smiled. "Because at the hospital we see people's true character when they think no one's watching. And what I've seen in him has always been dignity." The night was long for Michael, lost in memories of his own journey. The son of a doorman and a maid, he'd grown up dreaming of airplanes in the outskirts of New York City. A scholarship from a social program, and years of hard work had gotten him into the cockpit. And now, ironically, his biggest professional mistake was tied to the very kind of discrimination he'd faced so many times himself. The next morning, Sky America's headquarters looked different. Unfamiliar security guards stood at the entrance, and the company logo was already being replaced in the main lobby. The acquisition had happened faster, than anyone could have imagined. In the meeting room, all 15 of the company's pilots waited anxiously. Richard Thompson entered first, followed by James Wilson and a team of executives. Thompson wore a forced smile while James remained expressionless. "Gentlemen, as you may already know, Sky America is now part of the Wilson Group," Thompson announced. "Mr. Wilson would like to say a few words before, we discuss changes to the staff." James stood and scanned the room, his gaze lingering a second longer on Michael. "First, I want you to understand why I acquired this company," he began. "This wasn't just a business decision. It was personal." The room was dead silent. Mr. Thompson suggested I start the changes by firing problematic employees, James continued, making air quotes. In fact, he gave me a specific list, with pilot Michael Taylor at the top. All eyes turned to Michael, whose face burned. "Turns out, after looking deeper," James went on, "I found something interesting. Mr. Taylor voluntarily runs an aviation introduction program for low-income youth in the Bronx, a program that has trained 3 of the pilots in this very room." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Michael kept his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. His community work was something he did quietly, never seeking recognition. "I also discovered," James added, "that the irregularities that kept me from boarding were fabricated under direct orders from Mr. Thompson, who apparently preferred delaying a passenger over paying for the catering service I had requested for the flight." Richard Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "So," James concluded, "before making any decisions about the company's future, I'd like to have a private conversation with Mr. Taylor. The rest of you are dismissed for now, but remain available. There will be changes, but not the ones you're fearing." When everyone had left, leaving only James and Michael in the meeting room, a heavy silence settled in. It was Michael who broke it. "Mr. Wilson, I came to the hotel yesterday to apologize. I know there's no excuse for what happened, even if I was following orders." James studied him for a moment. "Why did you become a pilot, Mr. Taylor?" The question caught Michael off guard. "My father was a janitor at the old LaGuardia airport," he answered after a pause. "He'd take me to work during school breaks, and I'd spend hours watching the planes. One day, a pilot saw how fascinated I was and invited me to see the cockpit. It was the happiest day of my life." James nodded slowly. "Was that pilot a black man?" Michael's eyes widened. "Yes. How did you know?" "That was my uncle, Clarence Wilson," James replied with a faint smile. "He loved inspiring kids, especially those who, as he put it, never saw people like us in the cockpits." Michael felt his stomach drop. The coincidence was almost unbelievable. "Your uncle changed my life," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "If it weren't for him, I might never have—" "Exactly," James interrupted. "And that's why I'm particularly disappointed by what happened. You, more than anyone, should understand the impact of shutting doors on someone because of prejudice." Michael hung his head, the shame nearly unbearable. "Which brings me to a difficult decision," James continued. "Mr. Thompson wanted me to start my leadership by firing you, as an example." Michael nodded, resigned. "I understand. But that's not what I'm going to do," James said, surprising him. "Instead, I want you to lead a new program at the company, an inclusion and diversity initiative that will make Sky America the most diverse airline in the country." Michael stared at James in disbelief. "But why? After what I did?" "Because people who've never made mistakes rarely understand the value of a second chance," James replied. "My uncle used to say our country will only change when we learn to build bridges where others put up walls. I'm giving you the chance to build that bridge, Michael. Will you take it?" In that moment, something inside Michael Taylor shifted forever. The shame was still there, but now it was joined by a determination he hadn't felt in years. "I will, Mr. Wilson, and I promise you won't regret it." James smiled for the first time. "Then we're off to a good start already. And please, call me James." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now back to the story. The following weeks were a roller coaster of emotions and changes. Sky America, now rebranded as American Wings, underwent a complete transformation. The old slogan, "Fly with those who understand," was replaced with "New horizons for everyone." Michael threw himself into the new project. At first, he faced resistance from colleagues who didn't understand why the pilot who discriminated against the bosses had been promoted instead of fired. But James made sure to clarify the situation in an all-hands meeting. "Mr. Taylor made a mistake, yes, a mistake he has taken responsibility for," James explained to all the employees gathered in the main hangar. But the real failure was a company culture that encouraged such behavior. That's the culture we're changing, not just punishing individuals. Michael Taylor's new position as Director of Diversity and Inclusion came with enormous responsibilities. His first project was expanding the volunteer program he'd already been running in the Bronx, turning it into an official company initiative with scholarships for underprivileged youth interested in aviation. Sarah couldn't have been prouder. One evening over dinner, she remarked, "You seem different, you know, more alive." Michael smiled. "It's because I'm finally doing something that truly matters. Something beyond just flying planes." Sarah held his hand across the table. "You've always been a good man, Michael. You just needed a chance to show it beyond our four walls." The relationship between Michael and James Wilson slowly evolved from tense formality to genuine mutual respect. They didn't become close friends. The initial incident had created a barrier that would take time to fully dissolve, but they worked together toward a common goal. 3 months after the acquisition, American Wings officially launched its Aviation Inclusion Program. The ceremony took place at the same private airport where Michael had once stopped James from boarding. The symbolism wasn't lost on the press in attendance. "This program isn't just about creating opportunities," Michael said in his speech with James by his side. "It's about recognizing that talent exists everywhere, but opportunities don't, and understanding that we all lose when invisible. Barriers keep people from reaching their potential." The response was immediate. Several industry companies expressed interest in replicating the model, and the scholarship program received hundreds of applications in its first days. But not everything was smooth sailing. Richard Thompson, the former owner who remained a minority shareholder, didn't hide his displeasure with the changes. "You're turning an aviation company into a charity," he complained during a board meeting. "This will scare off traditional clients." "If by traditional you mean prejudiced, then maybe it's best they take their business elsewhere," James replied calmly. "But the numbers say otherwise. Our revenue has increased 12% since the changes." It was true. American Wings' new image had attracted a younger, more diverse corporate clientele, companies that valued social responsibility in their business partners. Meanwhile, in the day-to-day operations, Michael faced his own challenges. One afternoon, walking into the pilot's lounge, he noticed conversations abruptly stopping. "If you have something to say, I'd rather you say it to my face," he said, looking at his colleagues. David Miller, one of the senior pilots, stepped forward. "Look, Michael, no offense to what you're doing, but some of us are worried the new hiring criteria might lower technical standards." Michael took a deep breath. "David, the program doesn't change technical requirements at all. We still demand the same certifications, the same flight hours, the same level of excellence. The only difference is now we're actively looking for talent in places we used to ignore." "And why should we do that?" Another pilot countered. "If they were really good, they'd already be here, right?" "Andrew, do you know how much commercial pilot training costs?" Michael asked. "Over $150,000. How many Americans have that kind of money? We're talking about people who never had a chance, not because they weren't capable, but because they were born in the wrong place." The room fell silent for a moment. "My father was a doorman," Michael continued. "I'm only here because I got a scholarship and worked like crazy. For every one of us who made it, how many other talents have we lost?" After that day, the resistance didn't disappear completely, but it lessened significantly. Some pilots began volunteering to teach in the program, and others suggested expanding the initiative to include aircraft mechanics and air traffic controllers as well. 6 months after the program's launch came the first big test. One of the young graduates from the initiative, Tyrone Jackson, a 23-year-old black man from the outskirts of New Orleans, had completed all his training with excellence and was ready for his first flight as a co-pilot. Normally, this would have been just another routine mission, but Richard Thompson, still uneasy about the changes in the company, saw an opportunity to sabotage the program. "I suggest Mr. Jackson's first flight be something special," he said during a meeting, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How about piloting the private jet that will take our delegation to the Aviation Expo in London? It would be excellent publicity for the program." James and Michael exchanged glances. Both knew Thompson was setting up a high-pressure situation for the rookie, hoping for a failure he could use against the program. "Tyrone doesn't have the required international flight hours yet," Michael began, concerned. But James interrupted him. "Actually, I think it's an excellent idea," he said, surprising everyone. "But let's make it even better. Tyrone will be the co-pilot and you, Michael, will be the lead pilot. After all, nothing beats having the program director showing his confidence in him." Thompson couldn't hide his frustration, but it was too late to backtrack. When the meeting ended, Michael went to James's office. "Are you sure about this?" he asked worriedly. "That's a lot of pressure for Tyrone's first flight." James smiled. "Do you trust your skills as an instructor?" "Of course, and do you trust Tyrone's potential?" "Yes, he's exceptional, but then it's settled," James concluded. "Besides, I'll be on board. If anything goes wrong, the responsibility will be mine." Michael nodded, recognizing the strategy. James was taking the risk to protect both Tyrone and the program. In the weeks leading up to the flight, Tyrone trained tirelessly in the simulator. Michael often found him studying manuals and navigation charts late into the night. "You don't have to kill yourself studying," Michael said one evening, finding the young man still in the simulator room at 11 p.m. "I trust you." Tyrone looked at him with an intensity Michael knew well. "I'm not doing this just for me," the young man replied. "I'm doing it for everyone who comes after me. If I fail, it won't just be me failing." Michael felt the weight of those words. It was the same weight he had carried for years, the burden of being the example that many would use to judge everyone like him. "I understand that better than you think," Michael said, sitting beside Tyrone. "But let me tell you something I've learned recently. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be competent and honest. The rest will come with time." On the day of the flight, the mood at the airport was one of thinly veiled apprehension. The delegation included James, Richard Thompson, 3 company executives, and 2 journalists invited to cover the event. As Tyrone conducted the external inspection of the aircraft, Thompson approached Michael. "I hope you know what you're doing, Taylor," he said quietly. "If anything goes wrong, it'll be the end of your program and your career." Michael remained calm. "Everything will go perfectly, Mr. Thompson. Tyrone is an excellent pilot, trained by the best instructors, the same ones who trained me, in fact." The flight went smoothly until halfway across the Atlantic. That was when the main electrical system began to fail. Warning lights lit up on the panel, and the tension in the cockpit was palpable. "We have an electrical system failure," Michael announced calmly over the intercom. "No need to worry. We're following standard procedures." In the passenger cabin, Richard Thompson couldn't hide his satisfaction as his plan seemed to be working. "Looks like your program is about to have its first major failure, James," he remarked with a smirk. James observed him with interest. "You seem oddly pleased about a malfunction on a plane you're currently aboard, Richard." Thompson paled slightly but kept his composure. "Just stating facts. These kinds of issues rarely happen before your so-called changes." In the cockpit, Tyrone maintained absolute focus as he executed emergency procedures, just as he had trained countless times. "Backup system activated," he reported to Michael, checking navigation circuit integrity. Michael watched with pride as the young man handled the pressure. Together, they stabilized the aircraft and established communication with the nearest air traffic control. "We'll make an unscheduled landing at Santa Maria Airport in Bermuda," Michael decided after assessing the situation, "as a precaution." "Agreed," Tyrone replied, already calculating the new route. When informing the passengers about the diversion, Michael noticed Thompson's disappointed look which quickly turned to concern as James approached him for a private conversation. The landing in Bermuda was flawless, given the circumstances. Tyrone displayed remarkable skill and calm for a pilot on his first official flight. As local technicians inspected the aircraft, James gathered everyone in the VIP lounge of the small airport. "I want to commend the crew for their excellent handling of this situation," he began, especially First Officer Jackson, who proved exactly why our inclusion program is so important. Talent exists everywhere. The journalists present eagerly took notes, clearly seeing a story even bigger than they had expected. James then turned to Thompson. "Now, I'd like to discuss something. Curious, the technicians just informed me," he continued with deliberate calm. "The electrical failure was caused by a tampered component, one that, coincidentally, was replaced during the special maintenance you insisted be performed yesterday." The room fell completely silent. Thompson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Fortunately," James went on, "we have security cameras in all hangars, cameras that were installed after I took over the company, precisely to prevent sabotage." "This is outrageous," Thompson finally found his voice. "Are you accusing me of sabotaging my own plane?" "I'm not accusing anyone," James replied calmly. "Just informing you that I'll request a full investigation once we return to the United States. If you're innocent, you have nothing to fear." The journalists could barely contain their excitement as the situation unfolded. What was supposed to be a simple story about diversity in aviation was turning into a front-page investigative report. Thompson stormed out of the room, followed by one of his closest executives. The technicians soon confirmed the aircraft would be ready to continue the journey the next morning after replacing the faulty component. That evening, at the small hotel where the group was staying, Michael found Tyrone alone in the restaurant. "How are you feeling?" he asked, sitting at the young man's table. "Like I just passed the hardest test of my life," Tyrone replied with a tired smile. "It was terrifying, but also incredible." Michael smiled. "You were exceptional. I have no doubt you'll become one of the best pilots in this company." "Thank you for believing in me," said Tyrone after a moment. "You know, when I was a kid in New Orleans, I used to watch the planes go by and wonder what it would be like to be up there. But no one like me ever became a pilot." "Things are changing," replied Michael. "Slowly. But they are." Tyrone nodded. "Because of people like you and Mr. Wilson, people who decide to make a difference." Michael felt a lump in his throat at those words. If Tyrone knew how it all began, would he think differently of him? "Tyrone, I need to tell you something," Michael said after a pause, "about how I met James Wilson." And there, in that small restaurant in Bermuda, Michael told the whole story. The prejudice, the order to block James, the discovery of who the businessman really was, and finally the second chance that changed his life. Tyrone listened in silence, his face shifting through a range of emotions as the story unfolded. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked when Michael finished. "Because you deserve to know the truth about the man who helped shape you. Because I want you to understand that we can all make terrible mistakes, but what matters is what we do afterward." Tyrone was quiet for a few moments. "Thank you for your honesty," he finally said. "I don't know if I'd have the same courage in your place." The rest of the trip to London went smoothly. The Aviation Expo was a success for American Wings, with the Aviation Inclusion Program receiving international attention and partnership offers from several European companies. Upon returning to the United States, a surprise awaited everyone. Richard Thompson had resigned from his position on the board and sold his remaining shares in the company. Security footage had revealed his personal assistant tampering with the aircraft's electrical components, clearly following specific instructions. "He chose to leave quietly rather than face legal action," James explained during a meeting with the board. "And honestly, I'd rather focus our energy on the future, not the past." The story could have ended there, with the failed sabotage and the inclusion program strengthened by Tyrone's success. But a year after the incident, the true scale of the transformation became clear to everyone. American Wings had become the airline with the most diverse workforce in the country, with a training program recognized internationally. What had started as Michael's personal redemption project had turned into a model for the entire industry. On a sunny July morning, a special event was held at the same airport where it all began: the inauguration of the first class, fully trained under the Inclusion Program. 20 young pilots, men and women from diverse backgrounds and regions across the country, all with inspiring stories of perseverance. Among them was Madison, Marcus's daughter, now an 18-year-old fully recovered from leukemia and determined to follow in the footsteps of Uncle Michael, as she affectionately called him. The event was attended by officials, industry executives, and to everyone's surprise, the famous pilot Clarence Wilson, James's uncle and Michael's original inspiration, who had come out of retirement just for the occasion. When I started, flying almost 50 years ago, people like me in the cockpit were rare, Clarence said in his emotional speech. Today I look at these young men and women and feel that the sky is finally open to all Americans, no matter their color, background, or social standing. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the decorated hangar, Michael found a private moment with James and Clarence. "I never imagined that boy fascinated by planes at LaGuardia would come this far," Clarence remarked, moved. "And I never imagined that an ordinary workday would completely change my life," replied Michael, extending his hand to James. James, however, ignored the outstretched hand and hugged Michael instead. "Some mistakes are actually the beginning of something extraordinary," he said. "My uncle taught me that as a child." Sarah, who had just approached, couldn't hold back her tears at the scene. Her husband, once just a pilot following orders, had become an agent of transformation. "I think it's time we share the news," she said to Michael when the three of them parted. Michael smiled and nodded. "James, Clarence, we'd like to invite you to a special dinner next month," he said, holding Sarah's hand. "We're naming our son, who's on the way, after both of you." Clarence's eyes welled up with tears. "It would be an immense honor," the veteran pilot replied. "And I promise to teach the little one everything about planes, just like I did with you." James watched the scene with a serene smile. The circle was complete. What had begun as an act of discrimination had turned into a story of redemption, friendship, and above all, hope for future generations. Later that day, as the sun set on the horizon, Michael found Tyrone watching the fleet of American Wings planes in the yard. "What's on your mind?" Michael asked as he approached. "Just thinking about how a simple no can change everything," Tyrone replied thoughtfully. "If you hadn't turned Mr. Wilson away that day, maybe none of us would be here now." Michael reflected on those words. "It's strange to think my worst professional mistake ended up being the catalyst for all this," he admitted. "But I'd like to believe we would have gotten here anyway. Maybe by a different path, but we would have made it. Why? Because people like James and my mentor Clarence have always been there, quietly paving the way. And because young talents like you have always existed too, just waiting for an opportunity," Tyrone smiled. "And because there have always been people like you, willing to acknowledge their mistakes and turn them into something better." The next day, the new class of pilots would take their first official flight, not a test or training mission, but a real one, transporting executives to a conference in Chicago. In the briefing room, Michael watched with pride as Madison, the youngest in the group, confidently explained the planned route and expected weather conditions. "Any questions?" she concluded, looking at her colleagues. A hand rose at the back of the room. It was James Wilson, who had slipped in quietly. "Just one thing," he said, stepping forward. "Today you're not just flying a plane, you're showing the United States that the sky belongs to all of us. Fly with pride." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now continuing. The following months solidified the revolution American Wings had sparked in the U.S. aviation industry. The Aviation Inclusion Program, now affectionately nicknamed AIP by employees, expanded beyond pilot training to include mechanics, air traffic controllers, flight attendants, and ground staff. The company became a case study in business schools, not just for diversity, but for the surprising improvement in financial performance. Against all pessimistic predictions, American Wings saw profitability rise by 27% in the first year after the changes. It's simple math, James explained in an interview with Fortune. When you widen the talent pool, you increase your chances of finding exceptional people. We're not doing charity, we're being smart in business. Michael, in turn, had become a respected figure in the industry. His talks on inclusion and diversity drew crowds at aviation conferences. The man who once discriminated was now a symbol of transformation, but not everything was perfect. One April morning, Sarah called Michael in the middle of a meeting. "You need to see this," she said, her voice tense. An aviation blog known for its conservative views had published an article detailing the original incident between Michael and James, accusing American Wings of promoting incompetence in the name of diversity. The piece included details only someone inside the company could know, along with distorted information about the incident in Bermuda. The text insinuated that Tyrone had nearly caused an accident and that the plane's malfunction had been covered up to protect the program. James called an emergency meeting. "We won't respond directly to these accusations," he decided after hearing different opinions. "That would give legitimacy to lies. But we need to do something," argued Tyrone, visibly shaken by the accusations against his competence. "My family is reading this. So are my friends." Michael, who had remained silent until then, stood up. "I agree with James about not responding directly, but I disagree about doing nothing," he said. "This is an opportunity." Everyone looked at him intrigued. "I suggest we speed up the release of our documentary about the program, not as a response to the accusations, but as a positive affirmation of what we've built here." The documentary in question had been in production for months, recording the stories of the young people in the program and its impact on their communities. The original plan was to release it only at the end of the year as part of American Wings' anniversary celebrations. James considered the proposal for a moment. "I think it's an excellent idea," he finally agreed. "We won't be on the defensive, but will show the truth in a positive light." The following weeks were filled with intense work to finish the documentary. New Horizons not only told the official story of the program, but also revealed for the first time publicly how it all began, with Michael admitting his mistake and showing how that difficult moment had turned into an opportunity for growth. The premiere took place at a theater in downtown New York City. The press showed up in full force, curious about the company's response to the recent controversy. After the screening, the room was silent, heavy with emotion. Many audience members discreetly wiped away tears. When the lights came on, Michael, James, Tyrone, and the other participants in the film took the stage for a Q&A. The first question came from a journalist at a major news outlet. "Mr. Taylor, in the documentary, you openly admit to having discriminated against Mr. Wilson. Aren't you afraid this public admission will harm your career?" Michael adjusted the microphone before answering. "For a long time, I lived in fear of my mistake being exposed. That fear consumed me. By admitting it openly, I'm not just being honest, I'm freeing myself," he replied. "And more. Importantly, I'm showing others that making a mistake, even a terrible one, doesn't have to define who you are forever." His answer drew spontaneous applause. James smiled, proud. Another question, this time directed at Tyrone. "How did you feel when you found out your mentor had discriminated against someone based on race?" Tyrone glanced briefly at Michael before answering. "I felt a lot of things. Surprise, disappointment, confusion. But mostly I felt grateful," he said, surprising many. "Grateful because Michael had the courage to tell me the truth, even knowing it might change how I saw him. And grateful because, thanks to the path he and Mr. After that incident, the Wilsons made a choice, and I, along with dozens of other young people, got opportunities we never would have had otherwise." The questions kept coming. Some provocative, others genuinely interested in the company's transformation. The team answered them all with honesty and transparency. The next day, the headlines were nearly unanimous. "American Wings turns mistake into opportunity, from discrimination to inclusion. The unlikely story behind the revolution in US aviation. How one no turned into thousands of yeses." The blog that had published the accusations tried to downplay the documentary's impact, but ended up losing credibility when it was revealed that its editor-in-chief was a personal friend of Richard Thompson. 6 months after the documentary's release, Michael got an unexpected call. "Mr. Taylor, this is Anthony Reynolds, director of the International Air Transport Association," said the voice on the other end of the line. "We'd like to invite you to present the Aviation Inclusion Program at our annual conference in Geneva." It was the ultimate recognition. The American program would be showcased as a model for airlines worldwide. The night before his trip to Geneva, Michael stopped by Children's Hope Hospital to visit Sarah, who now coordinated a psychological support program for children undergoing cancer treatment, inspired by the partnership between the hospital and American Wings. In the hallway, he ran into James, who was just leaving after visiting the kids. "Nervous about tomorrow's presentation?" James asked with a smile. "A little," Michael admitted. "I never imagined I'd be representing the United States at an event like this." James placed a hand on his shoulder. "You deserve to be there. And you know why? Because few people would have the courage to turn a mistake into something so meaningful." Michael smiled, moved. "I wouldn't have made it without you, James, without the second chance you gave me." "It wasn't a second chance," James corrected. "It was recognizing that we're all more than our worst moments. It was seeing beyond the pilot who stood in my way that day, and recognizing the man who could transform not just his own life, but hundreds of others." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He watched Sarah and little Clarence James, now 4 months old, sleeping peacefully. How much his life had changed in such a short time. He picked up his tablet and went over his presentation one more time. The title was simple but powerful: Building Bridges Where There Were Once Walls. The Geneva conference was a resounding success. Representatives from airlines worldwide expressed interest in replicating the American model, adapting it to their country's realities. "What impresses me most," commented the CEO of a major European airline after the presentation, "is how you turned what could have been a PR disaster into an inspiring story of transformation." "We can't always choose what happens to us," Michael replied, "but we can always choose what we do next." Upon returning to the United States, Michael was greeted at the airport by Sarah, Tyrone, Madison, and dozens of other young people from the program, all wearing American Wings uniforms, a surprise welcome organized by James. "Welcome back, mentor," Tyrone said, handing him a small package. Inside was a miniature replica of the first plane Michael had ever flown, with a plaque that read, "For teaching us that the most important journey isn't the one we take in the sky, but the one that makes us better on the ground." Michael hugged Tyrone, unable to hold back his emotions. "Thank you for trusting me even after learning the truth," he told the young pilot. Tyrone smiled. "That's what we learned from you and Mr. Wilson, to trust in people's potential, not just their past." 2 years after the original incident, American Wings had become the third largest airline in the country, known both for its technical excellence and its inclusive policies. The recruitment and training model had been adopted by companies across various industries, not just aviation. On a sunny Sunday, the Taylor family gathered for a special lunch. Little Clarence James, now almost a year old, was taking his first steps, to everyone's delight. Sarah had invited James and his uncle Clarence, as was tradition on special occasions. During lunch, Clarence, now nearly 80, watched tenderly as the boy who bore his name toddled around. "You know," the veteran pilot remarked, "when I showed that cockpit to a fascinated boy at LaGuardia so many years ago, I never imagined I'd be here today, sharing a table with him and his family. It's amazing how small acts of kindness can change the course of entire lives." James smiled at his uncle. "And you taught me that early on, Uncle Clarence. That's why I couldn't ignore what happened with Michael, because you always showed me we should look beyond first impressions." Sarah, ever observant, noticed something in Michael's expression. "You seem thoughtful today," she commented when they were briefly alone in the kitchen. Michael hugged his wife. "I'm just grateful for everything, for the path we've walked despite all the obstacles, for you never giving up on me even when you found out what I'd done." Sarah gently touched his face. "I always knew who you really were, even when you doubted yourself." In the living room, little Clarence James happily played on the old pilots. A lap while James showed Tyrone photos of his uncle's early years as an aviator. Michael watched the scene, feeling a peace he'd never imagined possible. From a mistake had come not just redemption, but a true revolution. A quiet revolution that had opened the skies to young people who, like him in the past, had only dreamed of flying. "Sometimes," he said, returning to the living room with Sarah, "we need to lose our way to find our true direction." James raised his glass in a silent toast, acknowledging the depth of those words. They weren't just pilot and businessman, discriminator and discriminated, mentor and apprentice. They were partners in a journey of transformation that had changed not only their lives but hundreds of others. And as the sun began to set over New York City, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Michael knew with certainty they were only at the beginning. The sky, which once seemed to have such defined limits, now stretched endlessly before them, full of possibilities for all who dared to dream. End of story. Dear viewer, have you ever experienced a moment of transformation that completely changed your life? Share your thoughts on Michael and James's journey in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming stories.